Shalom and welcome to our Saturday Night Live Torah learning coming to you from Israel. It's a cold and rainy night here in Sfat, a good night for some hot tea and some stories. And tonight we're going to tell a story about dungeons. There's a place called Manor Castle, and I was reading how the tour guide was taking people through the castle. It's like going back in time, the time of the Middle Ages, with, of course, in this castle there's a dungeon. And he takes the people down to the dungeon and he's explaining that this is like the prison. This is where the master would throw his prisoners into the dungeon, right? And you would have like a ball and chain around your ankle. So another crazy thing is that the kings back then were so cruel that it was a very dangerous job to be a messenger, because if you brought a message to the king that he didn't appreciate, that he didn't like, he would throw you into the dungeon or he would have you killed. That's where that phrase came from, don't kill the messenger. This is literally what they did. They and everybody can see, like, well, what sense does that make, to kill the messenger? But this is the kind of thing that we have to be aware of that's going on with us all the time. God is using people to give us messages. He wants to communicate to us, right? And so when we focus on the messengers, sometimes we miss the point. We miss that there's a message going on. Okay, so every single situation that we find ourselves in, it's an opportunity to have a conversation with God. We want to make sure that we hear the message and not focus on the messengers. So there could be certain situations where somebody is rude, or any situation that sets up. We have to kind of look deeper. Like there's a smoke and mirrors kind of thing going on, because God is not going to like directly speak from heaven and say, I have a message for you. I mean, he wants us to have free choice. So we have the free choice to just go through life kind of oblivious. We can even say there is no God. We can just tune him out totally. Or we can go through the day having one constant conversation with God, and every single thing that happens, every circumstance, every person, we can say, God, show me what you're saying. I want to hear the message. And it takes a lot of courage to open yourself up to the fact that God has a message for you. There might be something he wants you to be aware of about yourself, something you have to change, something maybe that you don't want to do that he wants that you should do, maybe something that you're doing that you shouldn't do. But we always need to be like open and receptive. We have to have the eyes to see, the ears to hear. We just have to be, he says, seek me and find me if you seek me with all your heart. So God is all around and he sends messengers, okay? So we can't focus on the messengers. We have to focus on the message that's coming from God. And to me, it's so comforting to know that nothing is coincidence and nothing can happen outside of the fact that God allowed it to happen. So if we find ourselves in a situation, if we find ourselves in a dungeon, if we find ourselves holding on to grudges and weighted down like ball and chain around our ankle, and we can't seem to get past a situation that's happening, when we realize that it's really not about the messengers at all. It's really about connecting with God and having a conversation with him and asking him to help you understand why the situation is happening and what am I supposed to take from this. What's the message? Okay, this is what it's really all about, because the goal is that he wants us at the end of the day, he wants us to have joy, he wants us to be kind, he wants us to be filled with serenity, he wants us to be courageous enough to look at ourselves and change ourselves. And so we're always working on ourselves. And this is, we want it, God doesn't want us to be, he doesn't expect us to be perfect people, but we need to be the kind of people that he can work with. You know, you can't really work with that narcissist mentality, like, you know, I didn't do anything wrong, and if I did, it was your fault. You know, he wants us to come to him and be willing to look at ourselves, be introspective, and say, God, what's the message here? I want to see what's going on behind the scenes. I want to know what you're telling me. Okay, so that's the main purpose, really, through everything that God is doing with us. In the end, we will understand it. We may understand it, and sometimes it's hard to understand while we're going through, and it's only looking back that we see that there was a reason for all the things that we went through. But it's always to make us, to elevate ourselves, to make us, it's like these spiritual exercises to get us to the place that we need to get to. So we're going to see Joseph was in the dungeon, right? And at the first time that he's talking about his life, he's telling his story in a very victim kind of way. He's talking to the chief butler in prison, and they're kind of commiserating. You know how we talked one time about, you know, that I'll tell you what, like, you think you have it bad, you won't believe what I've been through. So the first time we see Joseph in the dungeon, and he's talking about his life, he says, you know, he says, I was forcibly carried off from the land, you know, I was kidnapped from my hometown, I was sold as a slave, you know, and now I'm in prison. He's in prison because Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of rape. Everybody knew she was lying, but he still gets thrown into the dungeon. So he's telling his story. He can't see the big picture yet. He's just right in the middle of it. He doesn't have a good understanding of why he has to go through all this stuff, okay? But the very interesting thing happens the next time, like about 10 or 12 years goes by, and Joseph is telling his story again. And it's like, it's not even the same story, okay? Because now he's got, like, he reinterprets the past. So what's going on when he tells his story the second time is, he's about to reveal himself to his brothers, and he knows that they are going to be shocked, and they're going to be speechless, and they're going to be so filled with guilt. And so he's going to reframe his story. He's going to tell his story. You can't change the past, but you can reinterpret it and you can reframe it. And so he's going to do it so that they won't be so guilt-ridden. What he really wants is a relationship with them, and he doesn't want them to feel afraid that he's going to take revenge on them for what he did. So it's so interesting. I used to tell my kids that in a sentence, and this always made them laugh, that it's what comes after the but. That's the most important part of the sentence. Like you could say, we were in an accident, but we're all okay. So you always want to know the most important part is after the but. Like, they were shooting at us, but we all got out alive, okay? So Joseph is going to tell his story. He's like, okay. He says, I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. But he says, don't be distressed. Don't be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives. All of a sudden, he takes this victim story that he was telling in the dungeon. He was saying, you know, I was kidnapped. All these injustices have happened to me. And all of a sudden, he reframes his story. And listen, it's going to be a story about divine providence and salvation and redemption. He says, I'm here to save lives. God sent me ahead of you. And he says there's been a famine in the land for 2 years now, and it's going to be 5 more years of famine. And look what happened. God sent me ahead of you to preserve you for a remnant. And this is a great deliverance. So it wasn't you who sent me here. It was God. So he's telling a whole different story. He's not a victim anymore. He's saying, like, look what God did. Look at the bigger picture. I don't want you to think that I'm going to take revenge on you. Yes, you sold me into Egypt and you sold me as a slave, but this story began very badly. But look how it's ended. This is what we need to focus on. Look what's going on. Don't hold yourselves guilty, because he thought they're never going to be able to deal with themselves. He reframes the whole thing so that he's relieving them. And he wants a relationship with them, and he wants them to be happy that they're all back together again. And the only way they can do that is if he just reinterprets the whole story. So he says we're all being directed by a force greater than ourselves, and it's greater than we can really ever fully understand. So that is how we can learn from Joseph. This is how he's able to forgive his brothers. This is how we get rid of our ball and chain, our grudges. We have to realize that these are messengers from God. Anybody in our life that's causing us any discomfort in any way, you have to look at it like this is God. This couldn't happen unless God allowed it, number one. And since God allowed it, there must be a message. So my job is to find out what the message is. How am I going to get through this spiritual exercise? How am I going to grow as a person because of these messengers that God has put in my life? So it doesn't make any sense to stay mad at people. It doesn't make any more sense than the medieval kings who would kill their messengers. Okay, they're only messengers. Now, whatever someone does, if they do something rude, if they do, like whatever the brothers did to Joseph, that's another thing. God's going to take it up with them. They're going to have to deal with that. But what we can only deal with is what he's telling us. So this is how in tune we have to be. We let go and let God. You know, he's dealing with them for what they did. But we're saying to him, well, what am I supposed to get out of this? How am I going to grow from this? You know, if someone treated me bad, you might have to think, well, did I treat someone like that? You know, is whatever. That's usually the most obvious thing is I don't want anybody to ever feel the way that I'm feeling right now. So it's just to get us more in touch with being a kinder person, not mistreating others. And so that's something we have to think about when we find ourselves mistreated. God, help me never to treat anybody the way I never want anybody to feel the way that I'm being made to feel right now. Okay, so forgiving is hard, and letting go of grudges is like letting go of that ball and chain, letting go of that victim mentality, that prison dungeon mentality, being enslaved to our emotions. Just to like sum this up, this is the secret that's found this week in the Torah portion. Joseph's brothers had treated him very unkindly. They sold him into slavery. Yet when he meets up with them years later, he doesn't hold a grudge whatsoever. And how is this possible? Joseph realized the amazing truth that everyone in our lives are, in a deeper sense, God's messengers. So whatever they say or do is only because God is sending us some sort of a message. And so what's the point of getting angry at the messenger? Not only that, since the message is coming from God, ultimately we know it's for our best, right? Once we learn, this is such a secret, that it's once we learn to live with this outlook, okay, we'll lead much happier lives, we'll be filled with forgiveness, and just be freed up. The ball and chain of grudges will be freed up, okay? So we can't change the past. We can't, there's things that are holding us back, like that ball and chain around our legs. But we can reinterpret the past, right? And when you just put it in a larger narrative. And it says that that is what Joseph was doing. And you know, therapists will use this technique of helping people to reinterpret their past. And so this is what he did to help his brothers and with their guilt. He's like, you didn't do this, God did this. so that helped them. So there's a YouTube video, you might have seen it, it's got over like 40 million views, but I want to have two takeaways for today. One of them is, if you haven't seen this video of Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, he passed away in 2011, but he did a video in 2005. So if you Google Steve Jobs 2005 speech at Stanford University, he's talking about this very thing that we've been talking about reframing the past. He tells 3 stories that happened in his life, which at the time seemed devastating blows to him. And later in life, he looks back over his life and he calls it connecting the dots. And so he says he had the ability to construct these stories. You know, our life is just one little story after the next story, and so much of it is how we tell the story, how we frame the story. Okay, and he was able to, even though he suffered these 3 blows, he was able to recover from the setback. He was actually dismissed from the company that he founded, which was Apple. And a few of us could have achieved the transformation that he did. When he returned to Apple, he created the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. And so he didn't think that anything that was happening to him was random. He knew that everything comes from God and that there's a reason for everything. And so our future actions can redeem the past. And so it's an excellent video. I was telling my oldest daughter about it, and she said she's going to play it for her students. So it's worth your time. It's about 15 minutes. It's a really good video to watch. Steve Jobs, 2005. And the last thing, you know, last week when we got off the video, I started a book. You know, I've always thought it would be neat to write a book, but it's like so overwhelming to think about writing a book, right? And there was a suggestion to write a page a day from this book that I was reading, and to write a page a day of like opportunities you had that day to do a certain kindness or something meaningful that happened that day. And I was thinking, you know, I would love to have like a day in the life journal from my mother or my grandmother. And so I'm thinking about my future offspring, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. And so I got this cute notebook. And so every night this week, for the last week, I've written 1 page. So that is so doable. You can do this. You can write 1 page a day, and it's all in the way we frame things. And it's kind of exciting because I get up in the morning and I think, I wonder what's going to happen today that I'm going to write about. And you know, we talked in another video about like when you haven't seen your spouse all day, like don't be tempted to commiserate and say, oh, you think you had a bad day, you just won't believe what happened to me. Like, try to get your head to go to the best thing that happened. Because when we start to see that everything is from God and every circumstance is something that is a conversation with God, and so it's a learning experience, it's making ourselves better people. And so I was going to read to you just a couple examples. I'm going to show you how easy this is to write like a page a day. I'll show you, like I'll just read to you like my Monday and my Tuesday. Monday was actually the yard site. Yard site means the day of death of my dad died on Monday, December 30th, and so I wrote that up there. And it's also, but my grandson was also born on that day. So it's a special day in our family. Okay, so this is my little entry for my 1-day page. It says, on Mondays, I meet with about 50 ladies for Torah classes. First, and I'm talking like I'm talking to like a 12-year-old. I'm picturing my future grandchildren reading this. So I'm writing in very simple language. Okay. So on Mondays, I meet with about 50 ladies for Torah classes. First, we have breakfast together, and then the learning begins. I have been going to these classes for over 4 years now, and they are the main reason that we moved to Sfat. I have so many wonderful friends here. Lately, I started arriving an hour early to help prepare the breakfast. And also today I was asked to go around to the various classes and take short video clips to make a video that will be used to show the mayor and others who want a little peek at what we do there at the Bas Midrash on Mondays. I feel good to do my part to make our meetings a success. I enjoy being helpful. Getting the breakfast ready with the other volunteers is a lot of fun, especially when Tatiana starts telling one of her funny stories. She's a retired actress and she is the best storyteller, and I love laughing with her. And then I lit a candle to remember my dad today, and I called Eli to wish him happy birthday, and I'm glad he got my package today, that's like a small miracle when somebody actually gets the package that you send from Israel on the right day. And this one, the next day, Tuesdays is my easy day. So this is Tuesday, December 31st. Today I took it easy. I only went to work a half day. I had a nice relaxing morning with Pesach. Then we worked on editing the video for my women's group. I did several acts of kindness throughout the day, like I ironed my husband's shirts, and I stopped at the bookstore to get the book that he wanted. And we had a nice steak and eggs supper together. But mostly my kindness was to myself. I had a nice long hot shower and I did a lot of reading, and I went to bed with my warm heated mattress at 8:30. So I had a nice long rest. I'm glad for simple days like this. I usually just do morning prayers, but today I got to do morning and afternoon prayers. I also enjoyed an afternoon Torah study. It was a great day of kindnesses, mostly to myself, and I'm very thankful to have days like this. So you see how simple language that I'm using, I'm doing, like I said, it makes you go through the day thinking about what am I going to write about tonight? What is the highlight of today? What is a kindness that I got to do today? What did I learn today? Everything can be framed in such a way that I have something. I want my future offspring to remember their grandma is she was filled with joy, she was courageous, she did lots of kindnesses. I don't want them to think, she was filled with unforgiveness and she held grudges and she was in this dungeon with a ball and chain around her. We want to be free from all that. So we have to have those eyes to see what's really going on. What's really going on is that God is talking to us and everything is for our good, and we can just trust in that. All right, so it was a great being with y'all, and I look forward to next time. Bye for now.